And our next moderator, Michael McGlathery, I'm working on getting it right, will serve as moderator. Let's welcome him to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. Like you said, my name is Micah McGlathery, and I'm a junior biology major from Huntsville, Alabama, and I'm a mentor for the Youth Host Builders program. And today I will be serving your moderator for today's session. And again, I'd like to say welcome and thank you all for coming. I will introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Onwuachi-Saunders, following our responders, Dr. Jimmeh and Dr. Carolyn McCrary. Dr. Chukwudi-Saunders is a public health physician with more than 25 years of experience carrying out representational functions and providing technical leadership in the development, implementation, management, and evaluation of international and national public health programs. She's a pediatrician and medical epidemiologist who excels in the use of epidemiological data for health policy and program design with expertise in identifying the needs of culturally and economically diverse communities. She's assisted national government, NGOs, and private sector organizations. Dr. Jimmeh is currently an assistant professor in the Department of History and Political Science and the interim assistant dean for administration of college and arts and sciences. Dr. Jimmeh's research interests include Liberia, Africa, neoliberal globalization, and a comparative perspectives on public administration and policy. He is the author of many works such as Imperialism and Anti-Imperialism in Liberia, the struggle for territorial integrity, sovereignty, and democracy. Dr. Jimmeh also earned his bachelor's in economics in Cuttington College, his master's in political science at the Western Illinois University, and a master's of public administration and Ph.D. in international relations at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs, Syracuse University. We also have Dr. McCrary. Dr. McCrary is a Jurana Lee Professor of the Pastoral Theology, Care, and Counseling in the Interdenominational Theological Center, and is the coordinator of the Doctor of Theology program in Pastoral Counseling at ITC, in collaboration with the Atlanta Theological Association. Dr. McCrary has a rich and diverse background that has spanned more than 40 years, encompassing the fields of education, intercultural studies, pastoral care, pastoral counseling, and pastoral theology. She is a graduate of Bennett College and Interdenominational Theological Center, a pioneer in academia and the church. And so now we will have our first speaker, Dr. Onwuachi-Saunders.
Thank you. Good morning. First, I'd like to thank all of you, especially a warm thank you to Dr. Warren for inviting me to come. It's a little emotional. I buried my mother on Saturday. And Dr. Warren called me just before that, and he said, could you make it? Can I still come? And I said to him, besides the fact that I have never said no to Dr. Warren, he's my mentor, he's like my father. When my father died, he put the responsibility of Dr. Warren to make sure that I become all that I need to be. And when he called me, I said, I don't know if I could make it, but I said to him, I feel I have something to say that I want to share with this group, so I'm going to try my best to make it. And there's a third reason why I got here, and I'm going to tell you that after I tell you what I have to tell you today. All right, so bear with me. I seem a little emotional. That's what's going on. So I get this call or letter from Tuskegee that tells me I have to talk about nation to nation, family to family. And I go, what does that mean? I call Dr. Warren. He tries to explain it to me, and I'm still like, what does that? I get off the phone with him, and he has talked to me, and he says, I know you can do this. And I hear him. I'm thinking I get it. I get off the phone, and I go, what does that mean? What am I supposed to tell them? So this is what I came up with, all right? There are traditional definitions out there. Nation. A nation is defined as a large aggregate of people united by a common descent, history, culture, or language, inhabiting a particular country or territory. For example, my father, who's now not with us, was Nigerian. He was born in Nigeria. Even though he was born in the northern part of Nigeria, he was of Igbo descent. Igbos moved or migrated to northern Nigeria, so they had a common language. They did things the same way. They ate the same food, and they basically hung out with each other. Family, a group of individuals related to one another and living together in a household. I grew up with a family of 6 kids. There were 6 of us for my mother and father. But when my father decided to leave America and go to Nigeria and ascend the throne, because my grandfather was a king in Africa, in Nigeria specifically, he was given the right to have more wives. My father, over a period of time, has had 6 wives, but we lived in a family where there were 4 wives and multiple children. Some of these children were my father's, only 2 actually, but others were not, because we did what was called, now I realize back in that day, a blended family, because some of these women came with their children. Identity, this is the big thing. Identity is the distinguishing character or personality of an individual. For example, our race, our ethnicity, our sex, our gender, and now we deal a lot with class. So, I'm African, wait. Am I African American? I'm black. Let me tell you why. I'm confused. I am female. I got that, okay? Class, well, what class do I really belong to? Example, my father was African, I told you specifically from Nigeria, met my mother, who was from Jamaica, in London. They lived in Brixton. I was born in Brixton. Grew up there, came to the United States when my father decided to immigrate, entered the United States in Dickerson, North Dakota. We were the only black family in Dickerson, North Dakota. Moved from Dickerson, North Dakota to St. Louis, Missouri. Became the first black family to integrate public housing in St. Louis because my father was African. Remember, he's not African American, so people treated Africans different than they did African Americans back then. From there, my father was the first black to get his Ph.D. in anthropology and sociology from St. Louis University. My father consciously made a decision that he was not going to teach at Washington University, even though they gave him that position at that time, because he was the first black that graduated. We moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where my father decided he wanted to help formulate the African and Caribbean study at Fisk University. At Fisk, in Nashville, Tennessee, my father got involved in the civil rights movement. There, I remember as a child, my mother served Kathleen and Eldridge Cleaver. They were not married at that time. That's when they met. H. Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, Willie Ricks, Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, everybody that was in the civil rights movement came through Onwuachi House at Fisk. From Nashville, we moved to Washington, D.C. My father became a professor at Howard University. I grew up in Washington, D.C. While my father was at Howard University of Washington, D.C., he became very well known on the international circuit. So the Nigerian government called him home. I had just finished from Howard, but my father said to me, come to Nigeria. I'll make sure you go to medical school. I didn't want to get engaged in the competitive process in this country that allows residents, non-Americans, they only allow so many spaces for them in medical schools because most of the medical school positions were for Americans. I wasn't American at that point. My mother at that point, my stepmother at that point decided, okay, if everybody's going to Nigeria, I'm not gonna let half my kids go through one line and half go through other, because at that point, my sister and I still had British passports. We were considered British subjects. My father was Nigerian, my brothers and sisters were Americans. she decided my sister and I would get a passport. Went to Nigeria, lived in Nigeria, went to medical school in Nigeria, traveled all over Africa, came back to the United States, went to Hopkins, went to I went to Hopkins, went to CDC, did my became a medical epidemiologist, did my residency in pediatrics at Emory. Who am I? Who am I? All right? Who am I? Where do I fit? Who is my nation? Or what is my nation, I should say. I said, what is my nation? Who is my family? Are you following me? Okay. And that story is for many of us. All right. Traditional definitions. Relationships. Relationships is a state of being connected or related. It's the mutual dealings, connections, or feelings that exist between two parents, countries, people, etc. Community, a social, religious, occupational, or other group sharing common characteristics or interests and perceived or perceiving itself as distinct in some respect from the larger society within which it exists. I prefer to define myself as it relates to relationships and community, and not nation or family, because those constructs are limited for me. They do not work for people of color. And as Dr. Warren so eloquently said when he opened it, they were initially put there for us to be able to count, to see where we might need to go or what we might think we might need to do, but that does not define who we are. So what happens next? One of the things that I believe that was spoke about before is this whole notion of intimacy. Intimacy or love. Intimacy is a close, facilitated, familiar, I don't have my glasses on, I can't, okay. Familiar and usually affectionate or loving personal relationship with another person or group. Intimacy now is the foundation of those relationships and that community. As fact, they deepen the meaning of what that is all about. So, we are now beginning to embark on what I consider a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift is defined as it occurs when a question is asked inside the current paradigm, but can only be answered from outside of it. We are beginning to ask the questions, but understand that we are in a limited paradigm that may not allow us to come up with the answers, but the answer must be found. Examples. These are examples of powerful questions that have led to paradigm shifts. Watson and Crick, which were two inventors, asked the question, what might DNA look like in 3D? The outcome, we discovered what a double helix actually looks like. Ray Kroc asked, where can I get a hamburger on the road? The answer, the creation of the multi-billion-dollar corporation called McDonald's. We are now at that point. We must ask these powerful questions. What would health really look like for individuals using an expanded definition of identity? Don't define me by my nation. Don't define me by my family. Define me by those intimate relationships that I have that make my world go around. Don't define me as a nation. Define me by my intimate community that I exist and I operate within. The problem has been that we don't implement that. We talk about it. Some of you may sit here and say, yeah, I get it. We talk about community all the time. But where is it really in the health model? The health education theory says the social context in which behavior occurs is always evolving. Health and medical practitioners must understand the importance of cultural backgrounds and life experiences of community members. If you don't understand that, then you really don't understand me, and you really can't fix me. You really can't help me. But for years, we've been allowing people not to really understand us because we have been operating within a limited construct of who we really are and how we exist. The ecological perspective emphasizes factors within and across all levels of a health problem. What that means is it describes several levels of influence, including the interpersonal level. How do I see myself? Individual characteristics that influence our behaviors, such as my knowledge base, my attitudes, my beliefs, my personality traits. CDC talks about that all the time. Knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs. If you do anything in public health, you know that. But do we really understand what that really, really means in the context of who we really, really are? How about the intrapersonal level? How do others see me? Processes and primary groups, including family, friends, and peers that provide social identity, support, and role definitions. Listen, I got a lot of dysfunctional families. If I'm defined by them, y'all, I wouldn't be up here today. All right? Community levels. Who are we? Institutional, community, public, policy, interventions. All of that is important. So there's some insights I want to leave you with. The level of intimacy defines the significance of our relationships. Let's don't at all question that. We just had the first session that talked about love and how important it is for all of us. A community can be built versus you're born into it. Let me give you an excellent example of it, which just occurred to me. My mother died on Saturday. The whole family was there, and I mean both sides, from my father's side and my mother's side. There was almost 200 of us there, okay? Family, friends, and whatever. And a lot of the dysfunctionality came into play. And one of the things that I have done as a single parent is build a community around my children, all right? I'm a single parent, but I never wanted anybody to say to my son and my daughter that they were at a disadvantage because they had a single parent. They have a community. They have been built. I built a community. And the last session reminded me of an example of that. I have a son. He just recently went to ask at Thanksgiving for his fiance now of 5 years, her hand in marriage. When he went, he took flowers to the mother and alcohol, like his favorite beer, to the father, showed up, asked for her hand in marriage, designed her ring, asked her on Thanksgiving dinner he didn't ask in front of the whole family that was there. What he did was he took her out on the balcony, got on his knees, asked her to be married, brought her in. She was crying. The family thought they had broken up, and she was like, no, he asked me to marry me. Everybody has said, my son did that with class. Gentlemen, I'm here to tell you, I taught my son how to do that, not his absent father. And I have told women time and time again, the world begins and ends with us. If we want men to be a certain way, we're responsible for that. It's not his father who would have taught him that. His father doesn't really know. I know how another woman would react and appreciate what he has done, all right? So a community can be built versus the one that you're born in. And many of us operate within a built-in community. Relationships are a valuable component in assessments and treatment plans. With expanded definitions, vertical and other silos are broken down, providing a broadened view towards optimal health and wellness. So now what? Expand client interviews to better identify relationships. We talk about it, but we don't do it as providers. I've never had a provider ask my son if there's something he feels that he's at high risk for, who are the other people outside of your family that could be beneficial? Or ask me. Do you understand what I'm saying? And incorporate those individuals or those relationships within the treatment plan. So within the home, there are other individuals that can be looked at. Within the community, neighborhood schools, before and after programs, there's so many relationships that we are leaving out of the health model that can actually make a difference as it relates to our numbers, our health disparities, how we look, how we show up. Because remember, we're not only biological, but we're physical and spiritual and social and emotional entities. All of those have to come into play. Document relationships, particularly where there is a high risk. For examples now, we're learning that there are other relationships as it relates to preventing bullying and suicides and domestic violence that the health profession is beginning to ask about, but not really documenting and really truly asking us about. Like, for instance, if you really want me to change a behavior, you need to ask me about my girlfriends, right? Not really. My familiar history is important in the sense of my genetic background, but if you want me to change my behavior, ask me who my girlfriends are. They're the ones who are going to get me to change my behavior. Develop treatment plans that include identified community relationships. Like I said, have you asked Mr. D, the band instructor, what he thinks? So that's what a provider could say. How about Coach Z? How about Mrs. B, who drives my mother to church every Sunday? We never thought of asking her to extend that a little bit and help my mother maybe go through on the way back from church and pick up her medication, which was stressful for those of us who were far away, who was trying to figure out who's going to help my mom get what she needed to get. Do you understand? But if a provider had made us understand that, we would have put that into the model. So in conclusion, the traditional definitions of nation and family are somewhat limited. To impact the health and wellness of individuals, we need to use a more expanded definition of our identity. Instead of nations, maybe we consider communities. Instead of families, let's consider relationships. Let's break this traditional model or molds. Let's acknowledge community as real and that it plays a vital, positive or negative role in the health and wellness of all of us. Let's recognize that current living conditions and now social networks are important, all right? Encourage healing by fostering the healing power within relationships, not within individuals, within our relationships with others. Recognize intimacy and love within communities. And let's also be wary that because of the HIPAA violations people are going to throw back at us when we talk about this, we need to support those waivers that are necessary to prevent us from dying what we consider to be these preventable public health priorities. That's how we can truly make a difference. I think that's it, and I thank you for your time. So the last reason why I'm here is because when I was driving up, I realized I had to come because this is my community. Everybody that has known about my mother's death has been so warm and loving to me. And so I had to be here today because I needed that as part of my healing process. That's why I'm here today. Thank you so much.
We thank Dr. Saunders again for that wonderful presentation. And now we'll hear from Dr. Jimmeh.
Good morning. And thanks very much for the opportunity. And
we again say, God still be with you and strengthen you and the family as you face these challenging times. And I said to Dr. Onwuachi that we are similarly situated because I just came back from Philadelphia. My wife's younger sister died and just got back last week. So it's in such times that we also get a sense of family. And while in Philadelphia, something that I wouldn't forget is the fact that although she was an ordinary person, yet she had up to about 1,500 to 2,000 people showed up for the celebration of her life. Ordinary person. And I said, she did not only make Philadelphia the city of brotherly love or sisterly love. That's a sense of community, that's a sense of family as well. And may I say, I too, when I saw the topic, was my mind kept reflecting upon meanings, and Dr. Onwuachi started off correctly, I would say, because clarity of concepts, clarity of meaning is so important for there to be a conversation. And we can construct families and communities by symbols, and how we talk, what we talk can help to bring us together or pull us apart. So this concept of the whole notion that concepts are elastic and the multiple meanings. So if we're going to build families, if we're going to build nations, communities, then we need to have something in common. And I would say here that it is not surprising that we're faced with this challenge of trying to have shared meanings about things. I may say clearly and without in any way causing any distraction about the focus, that we live in a world of multiple identities. We live in a world of multiple identities. And we've had this conversation in my own family. My two daughters were born in the States, one in Syracuse and the other here in Alabama. My younger daughter went to Ghana, and the conversation was the issue of identity. So, am I African American? Am I African? And so we say, well, it is not so much the literal meaning you're giving to something. That's important, I agree. But how do you function? How do you function? And so my younger daughter, Sienna, was in Ghana, and she sent pictures of washing clothes with her hands, pounding fufu. And so she is in another community, and she's integrated in that community to accomplish something. So I do agree with Dr. Onwuachi that yes, the old meanings, the old concepts we have are static, and therefore the need for paradigm shift. Where paradigm shift, what causes paradigm shift? Basically, you're saying the new questions you have, that we have, the new challenges we have cannot be sustained or answered by the old order. That's basic. Whether you're doing scientific research or whether you are interacting with people, new issues arise. And so how do we address them? But on the other hand, Dr. Onwuachi, I would like to say that nations are going nowhere. We live in a world that has been structured. The international system is basically structured on nations. Governments are still powerful. And if we're talking about social policy and the quest for social justice, meaning here by social justice you're saying an embodiment of fairness and equity and equality. Those two terms and the pictures you see are intentional there for you to really see if we're talking about social policy and addressing inequalities. And the pictures can really tell what the difference is. Because through nations, we have governments that act on our behalf still. We're sitting in this spatial dimension and people interacting, but we still say the United States of America. We are in Macon County. We are in the state of Alabama. And what public institutions do affect us directly and affect our families. So it is not that these old concepts are not relevant, but it's the way that it can be adapted to solve our problems now, because some of the issues are very perennial. The focus here is that I want to heal families through social justice. And in fact, I do like that concept of social justice because it is all encompassing. Just like you would say the social sciences include history, political science, sociology, and all of that. So with social policy, you are not only talking about economic inequalities, that's at the heart of it, but you are also talking about health disparities, you're talking about access to opportunities. All of this is important because the family is at the intersection or is in the vortex of inequalities that are vertical. She did mention that, vertical and horizontal. What do we mean? We're in election season. Inequality about civic participation and voting, but the constrictions are there, all these roadblocks. And we rely on governments. To do this, but we are not relying on them to simply say abandon our role. Our role is to be engaged constantly. And the interesting thing about this society is that we tend to always say the federal government. But I want you to know before you leave here today that there are over 87,000 plus governments in the United States. How did I come about that? Well, that's the national level, that's one. There are 50 states, and within these states there are counties and cities and townships and parishes, and policies are made at every level. What was the excitement? Yes, we're going to have the first president who happens to be an African American. Yes, historic indeed. And so we turn out to vote. Set the record in 2008. And then in 2010, we did nothing really. We didn't turn out. Yet, others went and organized, mobilized, and effected elections at state levels, state assemblies, and those districts, and sent representatives, senators to the Congress, and what was the outcome? Nothing is happening. There is gridlock. So we have to be attentive. We really have to be focused, and public policy requires a multiple front of engagement. It's interdisciplinary. This conference, this intensive workshop or seminar reflects that. We are hearing perspectives from different sides. And what are we to do with that? We are to see how we can integrate them to affect policy. And it's my understanding that, and of course all of us do understand that it is not easy. It is not easy because we tend to be limited in terms of where we function.
William Alexander McCrary IV, is a recent graduate of Tuskegee University. And you were invaluable. And nothing beats a good teacher and a kind heart, a good mentor. Dr. Reuben Warren, where are you? I saw you just then. There you go, right? You did this to me. I am a listener. I'm a pastoral theologian, a womanist pastoral theologian. In concentrating pastoral care and counseling, I love to listen and be of help. I can talk, but I'd rather listen. So Dr. Warren brought me here to talk. So part of me is angry, and the other part of me is kind of like Dr. Chuchu. I may have something to say. At the same time, I want to give a shout out to a community that is here and en masse. That's Dr. Wyland Dassey Wilson, who is an ITC alum, and she hollered at, oh, well, they're her parents. They're the intergenerational, there they are. Thank you. And Dr. Joan Harrell, as well as Reverend Dr. Head. And so for the ITC community, we are glad to be here with the rest of these communities. It's amazing how we make family and we make community. So let me see if I can say something that will be helpful. I'm very, very grateful, Dr. Chuchu. I want to pick up on maybe 2 or 3 of the things that you mentioned. I want to say something about identity and something about intimacy, love, and paradigm shift. I'm going to say it quickly because those cards will come up soon and tell me to sit down. African-American woman born Macon, Georgia, not to be confused with Macon County, Georgia, Alabama, so Macon, Georgia, Bill County. In fact, I keep running by Bill and making signs here. I get a little confused. A little more than middle age, who in 1972, when this horrible so-called study, the experiment upon human bodies, black men, ended in 1973, was made known to the public. I was beginning seminary, Master of Divinity program at ITC in Atlanta. I don't remember exactly what I read or thought, but I remember feeling my own horror, my pain, my anger, as I heard of the hundreds of men who had suffered. As I thought about the families, my sadness grew, sorrow, anger. As I thought about who they said was responsible, the United States government of public health service. Interesting, public health service. Not really. Rage. Kind of a broad frame for these comments. I also consider myself a womanist theologian. And when I talk about being a womanist theologian, that's, and a little of this dovetails this morning as we're talking about family and talking about women and men and gender roles and whatnot. Womanist theology is helpful to me because it has at least a tripartite lens where it says that you have to talk about racism, sexism, classism. I define racism as white supremacy, sexism as male supremacy, and classism might be more adequately defined as the have beat down on the have-nots, but that equity. So just know that I'm aware that all of these oppressive forces beat down on us all the time, as well as for these families in this so-called study. Let me say something about identity and intimacy. Dr. Chuchu, My most profound identity comes from what Dr. Howard Thurman talks about when he talks about a proper sense of self. A proper sense of self. And when Howard Thurman talks about a proper sense of self, he talks about three particular characteristics. He says there's the self-fact, self-image, and self-love. The self-fact, which is the bottom, the core of my identity, is that I am of infinite worth and value. Period. My self-image is that which is reflected to me and should be. It should, in fact, undergird the self-fact that I am of infinite worth and value. But oftentimes, families don't do that. You're too dark, Carolyn. You're more like that McCrary side of the family. Your features are too African, and in my day, in the 50s in Macon, Georgia, to call somebody African or black, a fight was on. And my dear mother, with whom I have a real love-struggle relationship, taught me the meaning of the word protrude, because she said, well, you know, your mouth protrudes. And I was like, what? So until I met my first husband, I used to talk with my hand over my mouth until he asked me, he said, why do you always talk with your hand over your mouth? I didn't even know that I was trying to cover this bad African-looking part of myself. And then he started talking about how nice my lips were and all that. Yes. New me. Yes. So, and that third part, self-love, Dr. Howard Thurman says that it's essential. Now, in order to say self-love, we have to look at Howard Thurman's definition of love. And Dr. Thurman says that love is and the first word of his definition is the intelligent, kind, yet stern expression of kinship of one individual toward another, I would say one person toward another, toward the maintenance and furtherance of life at its highest level. Mentions of you that you just try to kill off, and I want to let you know that you can't kill them. You need to just let them have voice and then let them talk to each other so that you all can decide how you're going to be and how you're going to act and what you're going to do, because you're going to need Carolyn, you're going to need Carolyn, you're going to need Miss Priss, you're going to need little sister, you're going to need big girl, you know, you're going to need all of them as you go through the rest of life. Briefly want to say about a paradigm shift. One of my greatest paradigm shifts, was my theological paradigm shift. Very compressed. What I didn't say when I entered seminary was that I was suicidal. All life's forces that I mentioned and haven't mentioned. And I was just trying to figure out how I was going to die. But I didn't want to die like so anybody would know it was suicide, because I said that'll just bring so much shame on the family. So how can I die? To be honest with you, I used to think about an airplane falling from the sky that I'd be on, and people would be like, oh, she died. Oh, you'd be so sorry for me and all the people. I didn't care anything about the other people. I was just in my own depression, which I didn't know I was in. So thank God I got to seminary. And somebody started talking about theology, which I didn't know what it was, but thank God my research had led me to theology, because I was studying French African literature, and they said those things in those French African writers was about theology, and I was like, oh God, I've been through all this church school and whatnot, and I don't know what theology is. Okay, so, but this particular part of my journey, I found that there was a theology that said, if you do bad, you'll get bad, and more theistically centered. Blessings and curses. Righteous living brings reward, unrighteous living brings damnation and punishment. Therefore, what I was suffering, I deduced, was God's judgment on me, and therefore I should die. Because I had done all the things that I told God that I was not going to do when I was in Sunday school and church. And I will not name them all, but just about all of them I had done. Therefore, I deserve to die. So when I found out that was a belief system, I said, oh my God, I can't, oh wow, I need to explore this more, because maybe I don't need to die. So liberation theology and all the theologies that helped me to see that was not healthy. Not healthy. In fact, it was toxic, and it was leading me literally to death. Now, I'm going to end with this part. She tells me like 5 minutes, so I want to say something about paradigm shift in terms of lament. And I'll just touch on it. We might say more later, because my sister raised the question of God the other day. When you talk about theodicy, the issue or the problem of theodicy, theodicy, theos meaning God, and dike, the German, justice, trying to, well, if God is so good, then why all this evil in the world? So when we talk about this so-called study involving these men here in Tuskegee having been untreated for syphilis and all the rest of the horrible part of that story, how could God let that happen? Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? What does the presence of evil and suffering say about God as omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent? How do we reconcile goodness and omnipotence? Dr. Jacqueline Grant at ITC, she said she opens up every one of her classes saying, when we make that mantra, and I hope we'll critique ourselves with that now, God is good all the time. Oh, what does that mean? And all the time, what are you saying? Thus, if God is omnipotent, if God can prevent evil, how could a good God permit so many evils in the world? How could God allow him to kill, let die so many people here? How could God allow this man to go into Charleston and kill people in the church? How could God? So one could say perhaps God lacks goodness or power or both. Further, if God is willing and able to prevent evil, whence then comes evil? So the questions that I'm raising in the bottom line of what I want to say here with the paradigm shift is you can ask God anything. You can go to God with anything. If part of your paradigm and theology or whatnot is that, well, your arms are too short to box with God, take that out of your vocabulary, because I think that's a farce. Yeah. You can, in fact, take it all to God. So I want to say something about lament here in that line. Come from a book, Breaking the Fine Rain of Death by Emily Townsend. You have that particular chapter in your syllabus where she said the doctor don't take no sticks, talking about the so-called syphilis study. She does a real good job with looking at lament. The thing I'll highlight in my few minutes left here is that lament enables us and even requires us to acknowledge and to experience the fullness of our suffering, our plight, our pains, and our cries. In the Hebrew Bible, the communal lament is used by and or on behalf of a community to express complaint. One of the first things we think about lament is that we're going to cry and weep and wail, yes. But actually the first definition of lament is that you can complain and say, how long, God, does this go on? And even stronger language if you are of my father's lineage. Because God is God and God can handle it. Complaint, sorrow, grief of impending doom that could be physical or cultural. It could also be used for a tragedy or a series of calamities that have already happened. Yet the appeal is always to God for deliverance. So lament, unpacked, there's some phases in it. There's acknowledgement of suffering and crisis. There's movement, putting words to our suffering, moving to a pain and pains that could be named and then addressed. Leader persons helping to process the pain. And then structure, which is key for us here, which is how I'm going to end. Structure, act in faith-filled ways for justice. Act in faith-filled ways for justice. So I want to quote from the article that Voices for Our Fathers, Keeping Memory of Horrific Study Alive by Catherine A. Morris. And it's a beautiful picture in the Diverse magazine that some of you all have. And it shows our sisters. It said includes from left to right, Emma Sinclair Willis. These are the leadership team of the Voices for Our Fathers Legacy Foundation. Emma Sinclair Willis, Florine Edwards, Joyce Pollard Williams, Lily Head, and Maggie K. Antoine. Dr. Reuben Warren is quoted in here. Once the shame and blame is resolved, then the honor and recognition emerges. So more and more people are coming out and saying, I'm a family member, that was my great-granddaddy. But we have to deal with the community pain and the whole so-called study itself. It was at one of the annual meetings in 2014, and what I'm highlighting here is the justice part, the structure as act in faith-filled ways for justice. And I'm proud of the families because in addition to their lamenting, they are now bonding together to act for justice themselves. It was at one of the annual meetings in 2014 that Edwards, Head, and other study participants, children, grandchildren, and their wives decided to start a non-profit called Voices for Our Fathers Legacy Foundation. The last male survivor of the study passed in 2004, and the last wife infected with the disease died in 2009, according to CDC. Through the organization, the women hope to reach as many families and descendants as they can to keep that memory alive and to tell their fathers' stories. Jump back one sentence. Women like Head and Edwards are some of the few left who can perpetuate a first-hand memory of the experiences their parents endured. They hope one day to create a scholarship fund for descendants, and to create a more lasting memorial of the so-called study. A garden, and I think my sister Florine was telling me that the garden has been initiated. A garden, a living testimony, somewhere in Tuskegee itself, partnering with the National Center for Bioethics and Research and Health, CARE, is also a part of their mission. They fear that without a concerted effort, the study, and Dr. Reuben Warren tells the so-called study, might become a footnote in history, in the history books, even for those who are descended from the families. For a lot of families, it was just something you didn't talk about. As a result, some of the younger generation can't even say that they're descendants. She laments. Joyce Pollard Williams is another board member with Voices for Our Fathers. She makes outreach efforts to descendants and their families occasionally. Occasionally they say people to want to know that is there any money in it for them. We know about the Fred Gray filed a class action suit. It says here 1.8 billion, filed for 1.8 billion in 1970s, but the claim was settled out of court for 10 million, let us be clear. Survivors received approximately 40,000 each. Their wives and heirs received varying lesser amounts. The point I want to highlight is what Williams says. So, as Williams says, there's no money involved in this Voices for Our Fathers Legacy Foundation. It is just that this happened to our parents and our grandparents, and we are just trying to keep this alive, unquote. As I take my seat, a fourth dimension of lament has to do with a covenantal relationship. Here in the West, we don't lament, we don't take time, and all of us have to take our time to grieve. We must do it, and or complain. But Emily Towns, as well as Walter Brueggemann, a Hebrew Bible scholar, says loss of lament is also a loss of genuine covenant interaction with God. Loss of lament is that the petitioner either becomes voiceless or has a voice permitted to speak only praise. When lament is absent, covenant is created only as celebration and joy and well-being. Without lament, covenant is a practice of denial and pretense that sanctions social control. So when we're talking about relationships, to me, Dr. Chuchu, one of the fundamental relationships is that relationship with a higher power, with God, with the divine, with the eternal. Spiritual. And working on that covenantal relationship undergirds, for me, the identity and all the other relationships that we have that meet with each other, because I do believe that we're spirits walking around in these physical flesh. So when genuine lament, we live in a tension of being in relationship with God, and I love that, because you live in the tension. When I recognize that, I'm not alone, everybody lives in tension. Being in pain and wrestling with God in covenantal, meaningful, growing, healing ways. Genuine lament always returns to God or higher power and advocates continued relationship, because it is about being in relationship. Thank you.
We want to thank all our presenters again for their wonderful presentations. And now we will open the floor for questions, comments, any of that nature. So if you have, do so.
Hello.
How are you?
Angela Williams. I'm a national public health student at Th.D. University. And my question was...
Speak up, please.
Okay. My question was, you were speaking in terms of equity, and you mentioned the outsourcing of labor that large corporations have. And my question is, whose responsibility is it to make sure that the families are being able to be sufficiently provided for, in that corporations are able to come from the global north and the global south, and also in terms of in the U.S. Whose responsibility is that for internationally? Is it the hegemonic countries that these companies come out of, or the localities where the workers are actually living? Mm-hmm. And also in terms of the United States, whose responsibility is it as to when workers, say for instance, maybe migrant farm workers or workers that are in factories are able to take care of their families?
Okay, thanks. Yes, right. We live, in fact, the United Nations Development, Economic and Social Council published a document on social justice in an open world. Whose responsibility? It's all of us, but let me be more specific. Corporations are granted their charters within these countries, and they function within localities, they function within the state, they function within a certain community. And as long as they're doing business, you have those who said it is not only just about profit, but also the corporation has social responsibility. That's an ethic that we've heard about a lot. And that was in a way honored for some time. But the more and more you have open borders, especially with respect to the policy of neo-globalization, it means we'll go where we make profits. We are accountable to our board of directors, or the shareholders, and it's about making the profits so that we can increase their dividends. You see, it is interesting that those who benefit from that kind of arrangement or that kind of a relationship, no problem. And they employ people in the communities for a while. But then we're saying that there are more attractive markets abroad. So they go away. Now we're hearing that policies have to be formulated to say that companies that were established in a particular community if they get monies from the federal government or from the state government, they should pay a back of some sort of disincentive before they can leave. So that's one way of saying we can be responsible. So that is the legislatures, the Congress, they should be the ones, because they make these laws. State, city governments come up with what you call investment packages. So it is in that process, I would say, that one can come up with policies that will help to mitigate some of these problems that we're facing here. Now, in developed countries, in affluent societies, you do have the structures to do that, regulatory policies. But again, be aware of the fact that when you talk about public policy making, there are different types. When you talk about the regulatory type, yes, the legislatures come up with that. But then at the same time, you're talking politics. What happens with the Republicans and the Democrats? You tend to see that Democrats will want to say regulate more, and Republicans come up and say deregulate because it's too expensive for business. So at the national level, I would say those laws, those policies can help to say you are responsible for this kind of action, and there can be a disincentive. Now in the global south, where the infrastructure is absent, where it is weak, and governments are just coming up with all kinds of negotiations just because they want to attract businesses into their communities. I'm from Liberia, and the Firestone, you hear about Firestone, your rubber tires and all of this. Firestone was in Liberia in 1926. And what they did there was to plant these trees, and in planting these trees, get the latex, coagulate the rubber, the latex. That's just one level of production, very minimal, labor intensive, but very short, and ship the rest abroad. Now, what do you pay the workers over there? Governments are collaborating with these corporations by saying no labor unions, or that in fact you are forced to work, and all these kinds of things. So governments on the other end are looking for investments, and so they are now putting into place these kinds of policies that will make these companies more responsible. Bhopal, Lahore, India, all around the place, child labor. So on the one hand, on this side, you do have something. And I'm saying even that is deregulated depending on the policy, depending on the politics of the time. On the other hand, on the other side of the world, you have the absence of a kind of infrastructure that will really say to people, this company is here, yes, but you need to treat our workers kindly, fairly. You need to, the minimum wage, you're talking about minimum wage. I worked, well, of course, it was not serious work. But to say that the reality of less than $1 a day is real, I was not depending on that. But I worked for a company, a mining company in Liberia, Bethlehem Steel Corporation. I was just a kid. I mean, I was in high school, in college. It was 13 cents an hour. 13 cents an hour. As I said, I was not depending on that, but it was vacation time. I got some employment, and I was excited to get some money. But if you look at it in the true sense where people depend on that to sustain their families, you know that's nothing. But I'm saying the apologists for that system will say, they didn't have income before, now they're getting something. So,
Can I take a stab at that? I'm not a political scientist, but I think everybody's responsible. And when I say that, the greatest example of that for me is the Niger Delta.
Yes,
And most
yes,
of you
yes.
know the story about the Niger Delta. It's not just the corporations that are there that are wrong, but the traditional leaders who initially sold out to the corporations to give away our resources, to allow our people to be enslaved, okay? So my father always said that when you point your finger at somebody, remember 3 fingers are always pointing back at you. So we are all responsible, okay? So as well, the federal government of Nigeria who allows the kickbacks from the corporations to do the inequality things that they do for the people. So it's everybody, okay? So I hope as a student, I wanted you to, and especially because you said public health, I want you to understand that.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Florine Edwards, and I am a descendant. My father was in the state. And I appreciate what all of you said about family, because family is very important. And that's one of the reasons that we're here. And we are trying to get more and more descendants, because if you had 623 men in the study, there surely is a whole lot of family. And we want to at least pass on, because now it is not as much of a stigma as it was. We don't think, because people like you and others are talking about it. But at one time, we didn't get all the information, because there were those secrets, and there are still secrets. But I will be 80 in October, and there are not. There will not be our history if we don't pass it on.
Right.
Because those things that y'all heard and you saw in some movies, those are not the true things, and those are not the people that was hurt. There were families that was truly hurt.
Right.
We're still hurting.
Right.
We're coming here to be healed because we need this. We know there are other people out here that need this. So I am truly, truly proud of the fact that and I was blessed to go to Washington for the apology. I was there with my mother. My father was deceased. But that apology is nothing like what all of you said about family. And everybody got to be family. And what we're telling the young people is what they have to carry on. Is these laws, these rules. And people talking about family got money. Family did not. That crumb that we got was absolutely like that money you got in Africa. Little or nothing. That was not what we should have gotten, because we shouldn't have had this to happen.
Right.
But since it happened, we thank everybody, and we just ask. I am membership chairman. I will, and I gave it up this year. But we're asking, and we're trying to carry it on what we can with getting the word out. We accept, we ask for $25 a year for membership. And our membership is not just members, family members. We would love to have supporters. Amen. And we will be around. We have the forms. Please help us out, because we do want to get our scholarship program started and other things. Thank you very much.
Amen.
Hi, thank you, panel. My question is for Dr. McCrary. Did I say that right?
McCrary, thank you.
My name is Codell Cook. I'm a Master's of Public Health student. I'm here with Morehouse School of Medicine. My question, so I know one of the objectives of today that's being here is to identify contemporary social justice issues that challenge optimal health. And so my question for you was, you mentioned you are in fact a womanist theologian, and you mentioned how important that is and what that actually means and what that addresses. And I'm a young man who enjoys and who studied, womanist theologians such as Bell Hooks and Maya Angelou. So I really take a liking to their work and what they've done. And it's touched me, and it's meant a lot in my process of growing up and so forth. So my question for you is, how important, and of course going along with one of the themes today of identity, how important is it for a young man like myself, a young man who are coming up to identify or even to think about identifying with womanist theologians and what that process actually means to actually address social justice issues that challenge optimal health, if that makes sense. Try to clarify.
Go ahead. I told you I'm a listener.
Okay, so one of the objectives, like I mentioned, is identifying social justice issues, contemporary social justice issues, and specifically for my generation. So things that are going on that are affecting optimal health. And my question is, since you are in fact a womanist theologian, how important is it for a young man like myself to identify with a womanist theologian, to actually progress, I guess, the works of a womanist theologian, the ideas and the values and the standards and the morals of a womanist theologian, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Your name, young man?
My name is Cordell Cook.
Cordell?
Cordell Cook, yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's a very insightful question, and one that several of our students often ask at ITC. Even in the course that I'm teaching now, along with some of the doctoral students, entitled Womanist Approaches to Pastoral Care. And the brothers want to know, can I call myself a womanist? And that's not a new question. I really appreciate what I'm sensing to be a relationality question. How do I be in relationship with women and women of color? So I think it's really important to look at that core value of genuine, authentic, loving, caring relationships. You can put a title on if you like, maybe not. Even, for instance, Bell Hooks. I don't know. Bell Hooks is not too fond of. She doesn't really call herself a womanist. So you see what I'm saying? So there are women who are for some of the causes and the core values, but they don't necessarily say I'm a womanist. Maya Angelou would have said, I've not seen or read what she classified herself as. So I'm just saying that terminology. An issue that I would like for you to consider, that womanists often look at, and that God brings me to these painful things. I'm like, give me something else to do research. But violence, and violence against women. As you probably already know, some statistics say 1 in every 3 black girl or black woman will be assaulted and or raped before she's 18. Some statistics say 1 in every 5 boys will also be, and men don't come forward, and Dr. Davis was telling us this morning about how many people don't report. So the issue of violence, I think, would be helpful for you as a young man to look at, to see what is it in your own family history or community history or gang history or club history or boys hanging out. Where is their violence? What is violent? Because we already know that there are different dimensions to this violence. There can be the verbal violence, there can be the physical violence, there is spiritual violence, financial, all of those. So where is it that you see, oh, I need to really pay attention to this? How am I treating women? Am I treating women as a male supremacist that in this group I can say this. Oh, I said it in my class anyway. But just because you're born with a penis, that means you up and you're more valuable. And if you're born with the vagina, that automatically says you're a second-class citizen and you're supposed to take whatever society gives you. So what is it that we fall prey to? And Dr. Davis talked this morning as well about those stereotypes, those social constructs. So I would suggest that looking at some of the social constructs that are detrimental as we genderize people, as we go othering people, and that will probably be the kind of final statement I'll say on that, is how we look to say, oh, you're different. Oh, you're from Liberia and you have an accent. Well, you're not really that intelligent. You're from either the South, therefore, or you're a woman, whatever. The othering, we have a tendency to do that, so pay attention to when and who and how you other.
Yes, sir.
Because when we do that, then I think that's one of the core strands of being violent, because we can take 623 men and do what we want, because we've othered them as being just poor black Southern men. Who cares? Who really cares?
Segueing on what you just said, I would like to have a little some more conversation about our identity. And first of all, to you, Dr. Saunders, condolences to you, to your family, as well as blessed birthday to you. And thank you for the expansive definition that you gave of your identity, which, as you stated, it was like, wow, she is all of that. You know, the allness that we are, that we know historically in this country, has been an intentional effort to minimize our truth ontologically of who we are. And I think of that in contrast to the quote that Dr. Harrell used yesterday in her presentation of, I think it was Mr. Henson, who was the last who made his transition, who was involved in the so-called syphilis study, and he said, I was just a nobody, and I guess all others who participated were nobodies. And we know that the whole intention of racism has been to make us feel like we are nobodies. And so as we begin to really be conscious about how we identify ourselves, what are some ways that you suggest that we can, at the community level, at the church level, in the various aspects in which we are involved, help each other to have more clarity about how we define who we are, ontologically as well as theologically?
I'll let them take the theological. I think it's important for us to validate, as I said, those relationships and bring them more into the a new formal definition for us. I think the more that we sit outside of that, the less we are going to accomplish. And why I say that is because we've all learned that where we're uncomfortable is when we make our greatest strides. And I want to say to the young man who asked the question about a womanist view, yes, embrace it, because it will help you develop what it is you need to develop to be maybe who you need to be. Do you understand what I'm saying? The fact that you're willing to embrace it, I applaud you.
Amen.
Okay, the fact that you stood up and said that. Because I believe that we've got to push ourselves. So those, what I call, what we kind of always knew were relationships, I'm saying they are now important to us. Formalize those relationships, as you said, because we tend to revert to those identity issues and it limits us. It very much limits us. So that's why I said, take these now, we know, like, let me give you another example. My son is getting married. We went to the funeral, and at the funeral, my son and his fiance have done the guest list, all right? And on the guest list, there's not much family there. He wants all his family that I have built around him now, not his birth-in family. So when we went to the funeral and, the family dynamics and dysfunctionality, he goes, that's why I didn't want them at my wedding, And I realized that I had slipped back into the birth family because I had questioned him about why there's no family members on the list, right? And why should they be? Because they are not supporting him in his wellness and who he needs to be and how happy he is. Do you understand what I'm saying? So let us get to that point and formalize it. And I don't have all the answers, but I'm a great question asker. And I know as a question asker and as a visionary, we can push the paradigm. Last year, I spoke at CDC. We had Public Health Week, and I talked about data and its limitations, and how many years are we going to stand up here? We'll be here 100 years talking about this, our situation again, even though we know the definition of optimal health. Until we put what we know into action, and what we know, it's not working for us. Don't be afraid to redefine who we are. Right. They don't define us, we define us. Right. And I can tell you, I do not fit those definitions. I don't. And they don't work for me, and they don't work for my kids either at this point. All right?
Oh, well, that was actually theological. And my sister Jimmeh, when you say theological, what part of that were you reaching for?
More about the promotion of us being guys into likeness as part of our identity. You mentioned earlier about us being spiritual beings walking around this whole body. And just whatever cause reflection you have further on that.
Well, I think most of us have kind of heard the term imago Dei a lot, image of God, being made in the image of God. And I also like to highlight the fact that in the Old Testament, it talks about we made Elohim, the plural. We made this human in God's image and likeness. So automatically there was a committee, or a council, actually, the translation, a council of the essence, of the divine essence, that in fact brought forth what is human life. And one can say, and one can debate then evolution, where does it fit? However, the fact that humans have this capacity to ponder, and sometimes it actually gets in the human being way, to ponder the divinity within one. I often wonder, now this is my Howard Thurman coming out, y'all. Push me. Because Dr. Howard Thurman believes that we are all creatures, and we are part of God's creation and creatureliness. Therefore, the tree is my brother and my sister, as well as the four-legged ones, as well as the winged ones, as well as the water that runs, as well as the rock. So when we, as Dr. Thurman talks about reverencing God's creation, then we do so recognizing here again that that's not some old other piece of dirt. that's God's earth in which the worms and all live and give me what I need. And as I reverence this creation, then I don't come along 200 or 300 years ago, as in this nation, the United States, say, oh, we got a word for this now, ecology. So now we're going to pay attention to the air that we have polluted, the water that we have polluted, the dirt. Oh, really? So it didn't mean anything when the First Nation people told you, this is an abomination and a desecration that you're doing, putting chemicals in water. How can you call yourself religious or God-fearing? You talk about this and you do this to Mother Earth? So, at an ontological level, in East Africa, the Muntu, the Bantu, the Hindu, the Kantu has that Ntu in it. That means that Ntu goes through everything, even this desk that's moving around right now. We just can't see it, because now the science tells us that there are molecules and all of that. But many, many years ago in East Africa, they said everything that is has Ntu, which is intricately intertwined divinity. And that's what we are.
And let me just say one other thing. Just thought, I hope I don't come across as being angry with those who have defined us into that box. I understand that you can't see what I can see because you haven't had my experience, all right? And what I'm saying to us is speak from our experience. That's all we need to do. Don't let them define our experience. That's what we've been doing, and it's eroded into our health model, and that's why we're suffering the way that we're suffering. Right. You know, don't define me by necessarily my birth and family, because my family is bigger than that. Ask me about other people that can support me in the behavior that you wish to see me demonstrate to you that I am on the path of healing. You understand what I'm saying? Or that I know, because that's what's really truthfully going on. Say it. I mean, we all should say it. It's not always that we're with their family that we eat right anyway, right? But with our friends, maybe they make us eat right, or we exercise with somebody else, or whatever. Just incorporate that now into the model. That's what I'm saying. The reality of how we actually exist. That's all I'm asking for. So I don't want to appear as if I'm angry. I just know that they can't see it from where I see it.
Right, right.
While you're passing the mic, I really just can't resist responding in part this way. And I'm reflecting on being very practical. What do you hold sacred? What do you hold sacred for yourself? And how do you see other people that we call, she mentioned the orderliness. How do you regard human beings apart from you? I had a wonderful experience with Dr. Onwuachi, first time meeting her, but the moment I saw her name, I said, I think I can connect with her. So I greeted her in her language. I think she was surprised, and then she asked me where I was from, and then of course I said Liberia. But it means, what do I hold sacred? I respect myself. I have a solid sense of who I am. So whether I'm here or I'm any part of the world, I have a core. And therefore, I also see and respect other human beings, regardless of how they look or who they are. And I think that's part of this whole business of saying who I am and this expanding identity to make us functional, to make us more loving, more caring, respecting people. And it was the wonderful encounter I had with her that just reminds me of that. I'm from Liberia, a small country, but I love to speak other languages. Just hello, thank you, goodbye, I like you, where are you from? All those things really do help.
I have another question for Dr. Onwuachi. And this is coming from a public health perspective. This is coming from a public health perspective again. I work for the Florida Department of Health, and we engaged on a massive project where we got an integrated system of county health departments accredited by FAB, and one of their criteria were community engagement. And you spoke about having the community define themselves and through their experiences. But what a lot of the county health departments had an issue, had a problem with the actual engagement piece and the community participation piece. So my question is, how do you encourage community participation when you have a lot of community distrust with public agencies and public entities that may not have always had their best interests at hand, or never asked them what their needs were to begin with? How do you start a relationship?
Okay. All right, so my short answer is that's why I am elated that you are going into public health. And I would love there would be more young people of color that would do it, all right? Because you're correct, there is a distrust. And how do you get through distrust? More people like us have to be like the people that we want to engage with, and we engage them and tell them they got to trust us on another level that's outside of the institutional level. So it's going to take time. But at the same time, what I used to, I used to say, when I was Deputy Health Commissioner in Philadelphia and I would do community participation, the community would say to me, "You're not the community." And I said, "Why am I not the community?" And they would say, "Well, because, you went to fancy schools," they would try to disown me, right? And I would say to them, "You can't disown me. I am a part of this community. When I speak like them because they educated me and I understand them, so I can help you be better than what they think you are, all right? So you have a double role. That's what I'm trying to say to you. You gotta stay connected to the community as much as you can, right? But you have to speak on behalf of the community. And the way it's gonna happen is more people are gonna have to come into public health that look like the community. That's all it can be. If public health looks white and you go into a black community, there's automatically gonna be distrust. If public health begins to look like the people that actually are impacted, then that distrust will go away eventually. But some of that distrust is warranted because they did do things to us, and they still do things to us, and they still say things to us. But those of us who have been in their institution, we have a lot of work to do, and we have to be the watchdogs for our community and make sure that we don't become disassociated from our communities. Do you understand what I'm saying? We've got to stay connected, and many of us don't. We turn our back, right? We try to act like them. We can't do that, or that distrust will never go away, okay? Any of you?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So just kind of piggybacking off of your question, and this kind of goes to the pastoral care piece. How do we, I would say as a people, work on that notion of self, and even with the intimacy, when a lot of times when we meet people, they have on a state representative, which is not their authentic self. As I've gone through the academy in different spaces, I've encountered a lot of people who are saying they are working for justice and different things, but they can't even speak to me, and I'm their equal, so how can they go back to the communities that they want to serve and speak because people are not on their level? And so even inquiring some people, and I'm going to be honest, in this space, they have not been as friendly because they don't necessarily think the space that you're from is on their level. So how do we as a people begin to have these conversations and be authentic in who we are? That's a part of the mental health, because sometimes in our minds, we think we're better than others, and we may not say it, and we may say, "Oh, I'm for the justice, I'm for the cause," but in their hearts, it's not really towards people, because the way they give off is an impression of, sometimes I do think I'm better. So I know this may be more of a little practical, small question, but I see it so much. And so as I work with students at Howard, some of them have even come to me and said, "Well, Ms. Williams, I don't even feel comfortable being here at Howard because some of my professors talk down to me." They think that I'm somebody and I don't know anything because of where I'm from or who my parents are and I don't have the pedigree. So I think there's a disconnect in some spaces because sometimes we feel like, okay, well, if I didn't come from this space or this whatever, I don't belong, when all actuality you do. So I think I kind of went all around it, but I just think from the pastoral care piece, how can we address some of these issues that people don't want to talk about? Because we don't want to talk about classism. Okay.
We don't want to talk about classism, and we don't want to talk about colorism. How is always the hard part. Actually, you have spoken it. Yes, you have. Sister Erica? Yes. Because there has to be, wow, Frederick Douglass, power conceives nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. You have to do as you're saying, we have to do as you're saying, claim our power. And a how under claiming that power will be to voice. That's why I love the name Voices for Our Fathers, because voice is critical. And to claim with your voice in a I start to say in a respectful way, but sometimes, because Frederick Douglass said, power conceives nothing without a man, that never did, it never will. Those who profess to favor freedom but decry agitation are like those who want the ocean without the roar of its many waters. So sometimes the water has to roar. and say, let's have a conversation. I have found that if we're talking about, and Dr. Tuju can probably speak, and you all can speak to more of the places where you're talking about, but I can also speak to in seminaries and other places where people want to look down, and students come often and say there are teachers who come to the podium with the British style and say, I have all the information, I have all the knowledge, I have all the wisdom, that classical model of education, and therefore I'm going to dispense and disperse and give it to you, and then you put it back on the test like I have given, and your personal experiences are not valuable. Your voice can say no, which is part of the womanness. My experiences are valuable.
Yes.
My experiences are valuable. I am valuable. My relationships, because, and I do believe, I really do believe that the African, the Ubuntu, that I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am, that when I'm speaking, I'm really not just speaking for myself, that I'm speaking for my community of people. And as I am speaking for my community of people, then I must say, we need to have a conversation about such and such and such. So it is a matter of, sometimes when you're on the front line, now you say pastoral care too, because being on that front line can be very bruising. And people will want to dismiss with the community of people there that you bring with their prayers, and my sisters were talking with the ancestors, living, dead, the living, and the yet unborn, speaking out of that kind of energy to say, it is valuable that we have this conversation about these particular issues, and I'm very clear about us being for optimal health for the people that I represent. So I will bring their stories. Yes, and Dr. Chuchu says
I have to go.
Yes.
All right, they're calling me. I got to go because I have to catch a shuttle. I just want to say thank you to all of you again. I want to say to you that paradigm shifts are made
through powerful questions. You've asked a powerful question. Keep asking it. You don't have to get the answer. You're still in the paradigm that can't give you the answer. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? One of the other things that needs to happen is stay informed. People throw around the terminology optimal health. Do all of you really know what that means? Dr. John Chazelle wrote a book called Optimal Health. When you read that book, you will stand with your back straight because you'll know who really knows about optimal health. It's us. We're the creators of it, not the other ethnic groups who define us. We defined optimal health. Stand within that power base, but keep asking those powerful questions. When you ask them, the paradigm will shift. You don't have to have the answer. Maybe you're not the one to have the answer, but ask the questions. I love all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Don't miss the show.
Yes.
Any more questions or comments?
Wonderful, very good.
And as Dr. Chuchu leaves, yes, bye, darling. Grace and peace of God go with you. And I want to thank Mr. McGlathery. Mr. McGlathery. We have to crack. McGlathery, that was it. Mr. McGlathery. Thank you so much for the good job that you're doing. I appreciate you very much. Thank you.
There are no more questions or comments. Once again, let's give everybody a round of applause for a wonderful session. At this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Warren, and he will lead us in our next agenda as the day will follow. Thank you.